Go back and see if that pops up there again. Good. All right. Looks like Drake's here too. Good to have you here, Drake.
Nice to be here.
So, I guess before we get started, I should talk about some things since 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Since we're just about halfway through this class, aren't we? This is chapter 6, and there's 13 chapters in the book. And some of you are not getting your work done, but you know how to go to Canvas and check to see what's going on, to see what your grade is. So you get to stay in the class whether you do the work or not, as long as you take care of attending class by watching the videos or coming to class. But to get a passing grade in the class, you have to do all this work. And the assignment on reading the chapter, have all of you figured out that if you don't go to Canvas and click on discussion and answer those discussion questions for the chapter, you only get half credit for reading the chapter. If you want the full 20 points, you have to go do those discussion questions. And you can't read everybody else's question until you answer it yourself. I think that's the way it works. So you need to take care of that, and then your summaries need to be one complete page, single-spaced, and the other assignments I think are pretty self-explanatory. So let's just keep working. There are no exams in here because of all this work you have to do for this class. So let's keep working and keep up. And I was going to say, for the online students, some of you need to get caught up with some videos, but if they're not watching them, they're probably not watching this video either. So I probably ought to send out an announcement that says we need to get cracking on our homework and take care of what we need. And the reason I put this up here today is I just took our topic and typed in cultural geography. Isn't that what this is? Yep, cultural geography. And up popped all this stuff, and I went to Wikipedia. And I don't know if you can read that, but it's got some cool stuff here that talks about cultural geography and where it came from. And the textbook talks about it a little bit too. But if we just talk about cultural geography and how it all, these guys say it all got started out in California with Dr. Carl Sayer. They call him the father of cultural geography at the University of California, Berkeley. And it talks about what geographers do when they're dealing with this cultural geography. Gotcha, Christiana. And among the many applicable topics within the field of cultural geography are globalization. And that's a big topic, globalization. Why do we all feel like that we're, let's see, citizens of the world? Why do we feel so connected with people all around the world?
Because we all live here.
Yeah, but they live so far away. It seems like, Celeste, what does it have to do with me? But you can get on your little phone, can't you? And communicate with people on every continent. Can't you do that? So all of a sudden, you are now a citizen of the world. I mean, years ago, if something happened in a country on the other side of the globe, we wouldn't hear about it for maybe weeks. And now all of a sudden, we're hearing about this stuff like instantaneously. I go home and turn on my computer and up pops the screen with all the news, and I start clicking to see what's going on in North Korea, what's going on in China, what's going on with the Mexican border, and you just become so in that sense, globalization is just that whether we like it or not, we're all aware of what's going on with the rest of the people on our globe all around the world. Now, maybe you don't keep up because maybe you just are too busy doing whatever, and you say, my plate's pretty full, I don't have time to keep up with what's going on the other side of the globe. I mean, the Japanese just sent a little bomb into an asteroid to blow a hole in it so they could collect some stuff from the asteroid, pick it up and bring it back and analyze it when they get back home in Japan. Now, see, to me, that's pretty cool. And I'm looking at your faces and you're thinking, if you've got time to look up stuff like that on the internet, you live a pretty boring life. I've got better things to do. So everybody has their own interests, but that globalization thing is that we're all global. And I don't know if you know this or not, but when I was in Moscow visiting my daughter and son-in-law when they were there as missionaries, I realized that I could have paid for my trip to Moscow if I just would have packed a bunch of jeans in my suitcase and put up a little stand on the street and say, American-made jeans for sale. I could have made enough money to pay for my trip over there. The problem is, if I would have done that, any idea what would have happened?
Probably been robbed.
A Russian policeman would have come by and arrested me, and I would be on my way to Siberia to spend a few months or years, whatever, for coming to Russia and corrupting their culture by selling American-made clothing. Actually, I went to Brazil, to northeast Brazil, where it's very hot and humid, so if you have a mattress, it gets moldy. So people sleep in hammocks. I learned to sleep in hammocks while I was there and fell in love with them. So I loaded my suitcase up and brought about a half a dozen of them home with me so I could give some to all of my extended family so they could have them too. And then I thought I could pay for a trip to Brazil just by flying down there, fill my suitcase up with hammocks, bring them back and sell them on eBay. I mean, Brazilian hammocks, not the cheap American-made ones, the real Brazilian hammocks. And if you've ever seen a real Brazilian hammock, you know that the American-made hammocks are just junk. They're just not worth it. So globalization affects all of us. Even if you haven't traveled, you learn about this stuff. You can read about this stuff. And even with missionaries, used to be you wanted to get in touch with a missionary, you send them a letter, it'd take weeks or months to get there. And now, have any of you in your church had your church contact one of the missionaries you support and turn the screen around and project it up on the screen where they could see the congregation and the congregation could see their picture and talk to them live? Have any of you seen that in church? It's just a cool process for that to happen. So that's what this globalization is all about. Westernization. Does this surprise you that the rest of the world wants to buy our clothing, watch the movies that are made here? Oh, that brings up another sad point. Did you know that people in other countries watch the movies made in Hollywood and think that's the way all of us live? Is that sad? You would think that Congress would be so concerned about our image around the world that they would tell Hollywood that you can only make movies that portray us in a good light. So all the trash movies you make cannot be exported, or you just can't make them because all you can make is wholesome stuff. Wouldn't that be a way to improve the quality of life in the globe? But Westernization is simply everybody around the world wants to borrow from us. They want our stuff. I mean, are you drinking Coke there?
Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper? I don't think Dr. Pepper's been as good at this as Coca-Cola has, because you can go any place in the world and do what? Buy a Coke. And you can go any place in the world, I think, and find a McDonald's. Not everywhere. But I was surprised to see one in Russia. And then in some, I just read this, in some foreign country, the people in that foreign country got mad at America. So they went down the street and burnt down the local McDonald's. Now, that local McDonald's was a franchise owned by somebody in that country who was serving popular Western food to all the people in the city. And some nutcase decided, we'll torch McDonald's to teach America a lesson. And all they did was destroy a source of Western food that those people wanted. I understand McDonald's in Japan has a different menu than McDonald's in America. Have any of you been to Japan? Maybe you could just for fun Google, since this is about cultural geography, Google McDonald's menu in Japan and see what pops up on your screen to see some of the kind of stuff. Actually, here in America, that's true. I was in, where was I? In Maryland, in Baltimore, visiting some relatives. And I went to a McDonald's, and there was on the menu crab cakes. They were pretty tasty. I ordered one just to see what they taste like. They were pretty tasty. So I think back when I get back to Kansas City, I'll go to my local McDonald's and order a crab cake. What? They don't sell them here. That's cultural geography. The people in Maryland like crab cakes. The McDonald's out there sell them, but they don't sell them here. Why not? Maybe they would be popular here. There used to be, have any of you eaten fish from Long John Silver's? I don't know where that name came from, but there used to be a place in Kansas City that sold fish that was called Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips. And it was straight out of England. They fixed the fish and fixed the chips like they sell fish and chips in England, in London. And I had been to London, so I thought, wow, this is really cool that you can buy fish and chips in America. And it was good, but they went out of business. Any idea why? People in Kansas City didn't want fish and chips from England. They wanted Long John Silver's or somebody else's. So that has to do, Westernization is just a lot of Western kind of things moving around the world, becoming global. And that's where they talk about, I think in the book here, talks about the history of globalization, ongoing evolution of cultural geography. You go, oh, evolution. Have your eating habits evolved over time? Okay, what did you eat when you were a little kid?
Everything.
Everything?
I didn't.
Because your parents fed you everything?
Mm-hmm.
Now that you're older and make your own choices, do you still eat everything?
I used to not eat red meat because I hated it.
I used to, and now and you find out that if you cook the red meat long enough, it tastes better than if you eat it when it's got red stuff running out of it.
No, she just hated it like that.
Debatable.
Oh, we've got a little cultural clash going on here today, don't we? Yes?
I wasn't a big fan of, like, kind of weird, wasn't a big fan of mustard on my hamburgers or hot dogs, but I am tolerable now. You know?
So, you see what I mean by your cultural, your food preferences have evolved?
Yeah.
Not evolved, they've changed. Well, what do you think evolution means? Change. That it changes. So don't get all bent out of shape about the word. It just means that, oh, and did any of you eat fruit that was mushed up in tiny little jars about this size when you were little? How many of you still go to the store and buy some of those? Because you just like that baby food. It tastes so good. So some of you are saying no, so your eating habits have evolved. Was there anything when you were a child that you never ate that you now would eat because your cultural eating habits have evolved?
Yes.
Nope.
Nothing, huh?
Octopus.
I now eat mushrooms.
I know. Okay. See, and that's what we're talking about here. Is that the evolution of cultural geography? That things change. When I was growing up, since we're talking about food, because if you have a chapter that sometimes gets a little boring, then we can talk about food and make it more interesting. And food's a big part of culture. And the geography of food is, where do you find that? I mean, what do people, when they come to Kansas City, what do they want to eat?
Barbecue.
Because Kansas City is famous for their barbecue. And then here's the question. Where do you take your friends to get barbecue? Do you take them to Jack Stack? Do you take them to Arthur Bryant's? Do you take them to, who's that guy down on the plaza? Do you take them to Oklahoma Joe's? Oh, it's not Oklahoma Joe's anymore. When he first moved here to sell his barbecue, he was from Oklahoma, so he called it Oklahoma Joe's. Now it's Kansas City Joe's, and he sells out of a gas station over in Kansas City, Kansas. Where do you take people for barbecue when they come here to town? You go, I don't take them anywhere. I go out in my backyard and I get out my smoker, I get out my barbecue machine and make it myself and feed it to my friends because we're the king of barbecue. Have any of you eaten barbecue in another town? In Tennessee?
In Texas.
In Texas?
It's amazing in Texas.
Does it taste the same as Kansas City
It's
barbecue?
better.
Because?
Because it's from Texas.
Because it's what?
Just from
Because
Texas.
it's from Texas.
Because it's from Texas. That makes it better.
I've actually never had Kansas City barbecue. I'm just thinking
You haven't?
It's pretty good.
And she doesn't plan to eat any because she's from Texas.
because I don't got
And
cash.
she's afraid that her palate might evolve to include Kansas City barbecue.
All right.
But you can take barbecue from Texas, from Tennessee, from Alabama, from Kansas City, from New York City. And now there can be a guy from Kansas City going to New York City and selling Kansas City barbecue. But all of those regions, all of those geographic regions have their own cultural take on barbecue. And it's and when you order it, it'll be a little bit different. Some of the things I hear people in Kansas City say when they go to other places is, the barbecue that I had there, I didn't like it. It had too much vinegar in it. And then the people come to Kansas City and go, I didn't like the sauce on your barbecue. It was too sweet and syrupy. Tasted too much like molasses.
Eat the food.
And it's, again, see, that's what we mean when we talk about cultural geography, that the culture, the geography of culture is different. Places geographically have different kind of cultures in terms of even how they serve barbecue. And so is this fair to say your eating habits have evolved a little bit? I still remember the first time I had a chef salad in Kansas City when I moved here. Anyone know what a chef salad is? It's where the chef takes everything in the kitchen that he didn't sell and he chops it up and puts it in a salad. And see, I grew up with a salad being lettuce, tomato, and a dressing made out of Miracle Whip and ketchup. And that was a salad. I had a chef salad one time just because I was in a restaurant where stuff was really expensive and the chef salad was cheap, so I bought one and I'm going, whoa. And it had ham, okay, it had lettuce and tomato and green pepper and onion and ham and cheese and beef. Whoa, and bacon. And it's like, whoa, load this thing up. So when my little brother came up here to visit one time, I had my wife start making chef salads, and I had her make him a chef salad. And he looks at it. Now you have to understand, he's from Oklahoma. See, you'd be offended by this, but I wasn't. He said, what is this? You took all the leftovers from last night's meal and threw them in a pan and called it a meal and gave it to me? Because he was looking for a salad being lettuce, tomato, and dressing made out of Miracle Whip and ketchup. I said, it's a chef salad. He said, I don't know any chef in the world who would do that. And he wasn't going to eat it. So I said, that's okay. I'll eat it because I like them. So give it to me. And in that sense, my eating habits have evolved more than my little brother's eating habits have. Now, when we talk about westernization on this video here, or on this Wikipedia thing on the internet, that's on page 204. That's this diffusion stuff where Western culture is being diffused around the world. And part of that comes from Westerners going places and people liking what they wear. Our youngest daughter, when she was in high school, went on a mission trip to Brazil. And she had heard it was very hot there, so she actually took enough clothes. Are any of you girls into clothes like this? She actually took 3 changes of clothes for every day. Something to wear in the morning, something to wear in the afternoon, and something to wear in the evening. You understand that? So her suitcase was packed full of 3 outfits for each day for about 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Whoa.
You're driving up clothes for that.
That's too much.
She
I wanna
had
see
big
her
suitcases. She could take 2 suitcases. Now, some of her outfits were, you switch outfits. She had more tops that would go with a certain skirt or whatever. She got over to Brazil, and they would stay at somebody's house. And usually, it was a house where they had girls her age where she stayed. And these girls would give her something as a present, and they didn't have much. And she thought, wow, how neat is that for them to share some of their treasured makeup or something with me. And so when she got relieved, she said, so, did you like that dress I was wearing yesterday? Yes, well, you can have it. And she came back with almost all of her clothes given away to these Brazilians. And they were just so excited because they had a dress from the United States. And I'm just telling you that the rest of the world, our Western culture has diffused because the rest of the world wants some of the stuff we have. Now, it also talks about acculturation, and that would be when someone from Brazil comes to America to go to college, and they pick up some of our culture here in Kansas City. Then when they go back to Brazil, they take it with them. I suppose the funniest thing would be if someone from Europe came here, and okay, if someone from Europe came to America to go to school and they went to Oklahoma State University, the home of the Aggies, where quite a few guys wear cowboy boots and cowboy hats and have belts with big buckles. So this guy from Europe goes, that's pretty cool. And so he acculturates. He starts wearing cowboy boots and Levi jeans and belts with big buckles.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe even shirts with little snap pockets on them.
Oh, man.
Did I hear a cultural reaction to that? And then can you imagine what happens when he gets on the plane and flies back to Europe?
Amen, brother.
And he takes that with him?
I would be roasted.
Now, see, I'm thinking he's going to be in trouble when he steps off the plane and goes home, right? Because people in Europe don't dress like that. Well, guess what he discovers when he gets back? Some of his friends think he looks weird, but some people think it looks cool, and they want to know where they can get a belt buckle and some boots and some Levi jeans and a hat like that. So, you understand that acculturation is just somebody coming here and adapting. When I moved to Kansas City from Oklahoma, obviously, I went through cultural adjustments. Okay, when I made that comment about steak or about food with the blood running out of it, that someone said they didn't like red meat, I said just cook it till you can't see any red and then you'll like it. And he goes, that's a matter of opinion. When I was a student here at Calvary, this actually happened. When I was a student here at Calvary, my roommate worked at a grocery store, and one time they had some steak that was going to expire, so he bought it cheap and brought it home. And I said, oh, I know how to cook steak. I watched my mom do it all my life. You get a little meat pounder, and you pound it, and you roll it in flour, and you fry it till it doesn't have any pink coming out of it at all.
Oh my goodness.
Beef jerky.
And if you want to know about what that tastes like, go to
Eat beef jerky.
.com.
go to that country buffet here in town that just opened up. What's that new restaurant that just opened up on Y Highway?
Cracker Barrel.
Cracker Barrel. Go to Cracker Barrel and order chicken fried steak.
Oh,
Cracker Barrel?
that's sirloin though, isn't it?
Well, that's what I grew up eating.
Oh,
And my friend said, don't you dare do that to this steak. And he opened up the broiler and he stuck it in the bottom and sizzled it for a while, then turned it over and sizzled the other side and poured it out and started cutting it in half, and pink stuff was running out of it.
yeah.
And I'm going, you need to cook that some more. And he said, you need to taste it before I cook it anymore. So I did. I took a fork and I put a piece of that in my mouth. And I'm going, why did my mother do that to good meat? This stuff is delicious.
Amen, brother.
And my eating habits evolved to the point to where one time I took my mother-in-law and father-in-law out to dinner and I ordered prime rib, rare.
Oh, that's boldsy.
And my mother says, I think I'm going to be sick because I'm cutting off little pieces of meat and it's floating in red juice. And it's delicious. I don't care what it looks like. So, see, I'm kind of a cultural, adventuresome person because I try things. When I was in Greece, we sat down to a dinner made out of fish soup. Here's what happened. The host, the lady in the home, went down to the market early in the morning and she bought a bunch of fish. The little ones that were about this long, she put them in a fryer and turned them into Crispies, like French fries. You just pop them in your mouth and eat them, head, tail, and all. The bigger ones, she cut them up in pieces, and then she cooked them in a pot where the meat just came off the bone, and there wasn't any bone in the soup we had. And it didn't smell very good when it was cooking, but I had learned that with cabbage. Remember, a friend of mine said, cabbage tastes different than it smells when it's cooking. And sure enough, when I tasted it, it did. So I thought maybe that's true of fish soup. And sure it was. I took a bite of it, And I'm going, this is good stuff, even if it didn't smell good when they were cooking it. And then after dinner, and that afternoon, before we had dinner, we went out into the ocean and we were snorkeling, going down and picking up sea urchins. Anyone ever see a sea urchin? Little black spiny things? We picked those up and put them in bags and we brought them to the house. And they were hanging at the corner of the porch where we were eating. And after we finished all the fish soup and the bread and cucumbers and tomatoes, that was the salad, cucumbers and tomatoes, and fish soup and bread, and the bread and grease is out of sight. I mean, it's unbelievable what it tastes like. They pulled that bag of sea urchins down and they passed them around, and people took out a sea urchin and took a knife and whacked it to break it open and poured the salt water out of the inside. They took their spoon and dipped inside that little sea urchin and got something. It looked like it was a piece. What it reminded me of was the inside of a peach right next to the seed. That's really tasty. And they scooped it out and they put it in their mouth and they're smiling and going like, whoa, this is the best dessert I've ever had. And they came down the row and they said, so do you want one? And I said, anything that makes you smile like that when you eat it, I need to taste it. So I got a sea urchin, popped it open, and sure enough, it even reminded me of eating the innards of a peach. It was that good. And I said, Nina, to my wife, you want some? She goes, no, thank you. So I don't ask her anymore if she wants stuff, because she doesn't.
So you didn't cook the sea urchins, you just let them dry out?
Didn't even dry them out. You just ate them fresh out of the ocean. But think about this. Think about this. Here in the Midwest, when we go catch wild game, it has a gamey taste to it. So to get the gamey taste out, we soak it in salt water. Did you know that? If you soak it in salt water overnight, the next day, the gamey taste is gone. Think about a sea urchin lives in salt water. He spends his whole life being purified. That's why you can eat uncooked raw fish, because the salt water has done so much to purify it. Isn't that cool? So now you have another, and for a guy who grew up eating chicken fried steak and then came to Kansas City and learned how to eat prime rib. When I was in Brazil, the steak in Brazil is really tough because they don't corn feed it like we do here to tenderize it. So, but the seafood, I mean, here, you go to the best restaurant in town and order catfish, and it has a funny taste to it because it's farm raised. Okay, seafood is all living in a purified ocean. You go to a buffet, I passed up all the beef and just loaded up on all the different kinds of fish they had. It was unbelievable. But I was in Brazil long enough to eat fish long enough to where now I know what really good fish tastes like. So I come back to the States. There's no such thing as good fish served in Kansas City. And primarily because by the time they pull it out of the salt water and haul it this far, it's starting to decay. Whereas with beef, when you take it out of the field and cut it up, you know this, don't you? The best restaurants who serve the best prime rib hang it in a cooler for up to 3 weeks to let it dry age for a while, to make it more tender and to make it taste better. Now my wife would say to that, TMI, TMI, too much information. She doesn't want to know what they do to make that stuff taste so good. So on page 204, it talks about cultural evolution. So your eating habits have evolved. And of course, your attire habits have evolved too. I mean, if you just went to Google and typed in a picture of cowboys from Oklahoma. I have to confess, all those pictures with a guy with a scarf around his neck, I never saw any cowboy in Oklahoma with a scarf around his neck. If I did see one, we would all start laughing at him because we thought he looked funny. But I've evolved from wearing cowboy boots and Levi jeans to what I wear today. And I basically say what I wear today. And when I go to Oklahoma to visit, I wear these kind of clothes, and they go, "Why are you so dressed up?" Going, I'm not, I'm just comfortable. Jeans are not that comfortable. Ha! And finally, they gave me so much grief, I finally found some jeans that are comfortable. Levi makes some denim that, you know, those stretch black denim that's got quite a bit of rayon or something in it that just makes it comfortable. So now I have a pair of those that when I go to Oklahoma, I wear them so my family won't give me so much grief. Diffusion emphasizes how various aspects of a culture spread from their place of origin to other places. When I grew up in Oklahoma, that was it. Steak and chicken and pork, beef and chicken and pork, and lettuce and tomato for salad, and green beans and corn and peas. Then I came to Kansas City. Oh, I should say, my wife's brother married a girl from Mexico. So the first time I went to their house, we had tacos. You know what happened to me after I was introduced to tacos?
A lot more tacos.
Where's my favorite place to eat? Taco Bell. I mean, all of a sudden, another part of my evolution. Now I go back to Oklahoma where I grew up, go to my little hometown of Enid, Oklahoma. They've got a Taco Bell there. Whereas when I was a kid, if someone would have opened up a taco restaurant, it would have gone out of business because you didn't buy that stuff. Why not? Okay, now this is the way I was raised in Oklahoma. You don't eat that stuff because that's what they eat in Mexico. So, maybe it's good. I don't think so. So we just rejected what other people ate because they were different than us. And I'm saying you probably ought to be open to experiencing another culture. I will confess to you, when I went to Greece, it was to visit my son-in-law's parents, and we were going to be there for a while. So I said to him, "Do they have Cheerios in Greece?" He said, "No." I said, "Would anyone be offended if I packed a box of Cheerios and took them with me? Because that's what I eat every morning for breakfast." And guess what my son-in-law said to me? "Yes, my family would be offended if you pulled out a box of Cheerios to eat for breakfast and didn't eat what they were having for breakfast." What were they having for breakfast? Boiled eggs and cucumbers and tomatoes and fresh bread. I left my Cheerios at home and learned how to eat in Greece. And then while I was there, I took a trip. My son-in-law's parents lived on the island of Kalymnos. You probably don't know where that is, but there are 12 islands. The Dodecanese, they call them. Dedo for 12, the Dodecanese Islands. There are 12 islands as a part of Greece, and I actually went to about 6 of those islands just to go visit so our granddaughters, so my son-in-law's parents would have time with our granddaughter with us not being there because she was attached to us and didn't know them very well. So we took off, and we went to Patmos first, and then we went to Rhodes and went to Crete and places like that. And on every island, the breakfast they served was completely different than what it was on another island. Every one of those 6 islands I visited had their own unique culinary culture. Some of the things they ate, I mean, they still had the bread and they still had the tomatoes and the cucumbers. Have any of you ever had just tomatoes and cucumbers and olive oil for a salad? It's delicious. Makes my mouth water thinking about it. And I'm thinking, my brother in Oklahoma, if I served a salad with tomatoes and cucumbers and he saw olive oil on the bottom of it, he would just pass it up and get some more mashed potatoes and ask for the gravy, and we would say, there is none. You don't make gravy for mashed potatoes, you put butter on them. And he'd shake his head, no, I don't think so. Because he's lived most of his life in Oklahoma. He's traveled a lot around the world, but every place he goes, he makes sure they cook. He actually goes in the kitchen. He's retired now, but he worked for an oil company. He would go to the kitchen and show people how to cook food the way it ought to be cooked. You know, steak, pound it, roll it in flour, fry it in a skillet. So he told them, this is the way you cook my food. I don't eat that other stuff. And he did that when he was in Russia. He did it in South America. He did it every place he went. So he's pretty stuck in a rut, which he's kind of fun to mess with once in a while, to offer him something that I know he won't eat. But acculturation is where you simply go to a culture and adopt something from them. And when I was in Brazil and I adopted their sleeping in hammocks instead of on mattresses and found out how much I liked it, I brought some home, and actually I could live sleeping in hammocks. I enjoyed it. Now I just use them to put outside between trees and take naps in the summertime. So that's these words that are used on page 204. Now these theories of cultural evolution, these theories of how things change. See, here again, the evolutionist says, remember, we at one time were hunter-gatherers. The only way we knew how to live was to run around and pick berries that were growing. And if we saw a rabbit eating some, kill it and see what it tastes like. That's the way they lived. And I'm thinking, no, I read Genesis and I say, what happened? God created Adam and Eve. He put them in the garden. And what did he tell them to do with that garden? To dress it and keep it. And that's where they got their food, from all this stuff that he grew in a garden. So the book says on page 204, they went from hunter-gatherers to pastoral nomads, to people who would have herds and they would take them from pasture to pasture, and they were nomadic in the way they traveled, and they would just move from place to place. When the grass got eaten up here, they'd pick up their house and move it to another location for their animals or their livestock. And if they raising goats, then they would eat goat meat. If they're raising sheep, they would eat sheep. If they're raising horses, they would eat horse meat. Now, see, some of my horse-loving friends think that's just wrong. I'm going, why? In France, every butcher shop only sells one kind of meat. So there's the chicken meat butcher shop, there's the pig meat butcher shop, there's the cow meat butcher shop, there's the horse meat butcher shop, and there's the fish meat shop. I mean, so you go to each shop and buy what you want. What do you think happens to horses in America when people don't want them anymore and they sell them at the auction? They buy them up and ship them over to France and turn them into hamburger. Or horse steak or horse roast or whatever.
My sister and I have eaten dog. It's really good.
And monkey and
And
cat.
And I think in Louisiana, somebody years ago introduced something down there called a nutria. It looks like an overgrown rat. And some people said, you know what? Since they're so plenteous, let's kill some and butcher them and eat them, see what it tastes like. And a guy says, it's good. And another guy says, I don't care what you say, I'm not eating that. And of course, most things that are strange that people taste, you say, what's it taste like? What do they tell you? It tastes like chicken. Everything. I mean, haven't you had it? It tastes like chicken. So you say, I'll taste it, and it doesn't taste like chicken. So somebody lied to me again. So the book says, this theory, remember, they went from hunter-gatherers to pastoral nomads to building towns and villages and farms and fences and all this stuff and crops and things. And we might as well talk about it since we're talking about culture here, because when Europeans came to America, then they saw these Native Americans who were nomads, who followed the buffalo herds because that's where they got their foodstuffs and the hides for their clothing and for their houses. And so here's what they said: because they don't have a home with a fence like we Europeans do, that makes them savages, and we have to civilize them. And I'm thinking, those of you who did some savage things to try to civilize them, you're the savages. You follow what I'm talking about? You're doing the savage thing by not acknowledging that there's another way, another civilized way to live other than your way to do things. And all of us can become guilty of that. The first time I drove a Volkswagen to Oklahoma, my family went to a family reunion in Oklahoma. I should have been prepared for it because I have a bunch of relatives who fought in a war against Germany. So what am I doing driving a car that was made in Germany? And I said, because I could buy a brand new one for $1,800. No miles on it. They said, well, no wonder. They opened the back. They said, look at this, guys. It runs on a rubber band. Because it has an air-cooled engine, doesn't have a radiator. And it was a tiny little car. But hey, to be able to buy a brand new car that was dependable for my wife and myself and our little girl, it just seemed like a Volkswagen made sense here in Kansas City. Didn't even think about what kind of reaction I get in Oklahoma by all the people driving big trucks with duals on the back. Just didn't, it wasn't. But see, that's Oklahoma. You say, what do you mean that's Oklahoma? Well, I'll give you a culinary example of what Oklahoma is like. I married a girl from Kansas City. I met her here at Calvary. She cooks me this delicious meal. She got some of my mom's recipes so she could make some of my favorite foods. And it was delicious. And so I finished the meal and I said, Nina, that wasn't half bad. And I still remember, she said, I don't know what to say. Should I say thank you or dump the rest of this in your lap? And I go, what? She goes, I don't know what that means. I said, what? She goes, when you say that wasn't half bad, does that mean half of it was bad and the other half wasn't? I said, oh, because see, watch. I'm sitting there thinking I should compliment my wife, but I don't know exactly what to say because I'm a newlywed. So I just did what my dad said all the time to my mom. Thelma, she would cook a delicious meal. He'd say, Thelma, that wasn't half bad. And she'd say, thank you, Bo. Well, I didn't marry a girl from Oklahoma. I married a girl from Kansas City, and she did not say, thank you, Tom. She told me that what I said didn't make any sense, and she wanted to know what I meant. And I said, you know what that means? She goes, no, I don't. I said, it means that was a delicious meal. She said, now that I understand. And immediately, I made a cultural change in what I said to compliment the cook. So then I go back to Oklahoma. My mom cooks a delicious meal. And what do I hear myself saying to her?
That was a delicious meal.
I wish that's what I would have said. But I go, Mom, that wasn't half bad. I'm going, oh no. I'm back in Oklahoma, speaking Oklahomanese. That's what I call it, Oklahomanese. And realizing that, and now, if I go down there and some of my relatives cook a delicious meal, I say, that was delicious. I've moved away from that influence. But there, in that sense, I was being bicultural, wasn't I? I was simply holding on to that culture when I was there. My wife says that when we go to Oklahoma, that I become more of an Okie than I am when I live in Kansas City. And the longer we're there, the more I digress. She's not talking about this being an improvement if you figured it out. The more I digress into Oklahomanese, and the quicker she gets me out of there and back up here to civilization, the happier she is. And I'm going, no way. But see, it's what I grew up with. And I've never forgotten it because it was part of my culture. But I've acculturated by being here, but I've also brought some of my Oklahoma culture with me. I mean, somebody says something that's not very smart, and I'm going, that guy is dumber than a stump. And I have no idea what I just said. What does dumber than a stump mean? I mean, I know what a stump is out in the field, but stumps, have you ever seen a stump that was intelligent and another stump that was dumb? I mean, a stump is a stump. The intelligence and stumps don't go together, but somehow, in Oklahomanese, they do. And everybody in Oklahoma knows what you mean by it. It means that guy's just stupid. Oops. Oops. When we had little children, that my wife went to the hospital and went through a great deal of pain to bring into the world, come to live in our house, guess what she said to me? Tom, don't say stupid anymore. If my wife has this axiom that she was raised with, if you can't say something nice,
Don't say it at all.
don't say anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised in Oklahoma. If you can think of something caustic to say it before the next guy gets his caustic thing out.
Amen, brother.
I mean, it's just like, it's a cultural thing. It's a cultural thing. Don't take it personal. It's just we go down there, and my wife says, you guys just dog on each other.
Yes.
I'm going, yeah. That's what it's all about. And it's a cultural thing. So we have food cultures, we have word cultures, we have clothing cultures, we have housing cultures. And all of this has to do with different parts of the country. Now, just so you would know something, I'm going to give you something here that, oh, and for the people online, this has already been uploaded to files. But this is Oklahoma History and Culture. You go, why are you giving us this? Well, why do you think? I'm from Oklahoma, that's why. And I think it's my, what do they call that? Academic freedom to impose on you a little bit of Oklahomanese.
Trying to indoctrinate us.
So there's Oklahoma. Now, see, whoever wrote this, Oklahoma is truly a land of cowboys and Indians.
Amen.
Now, right away, the picture that comes to my mind is the old cowboy and Indian movies. And I used to watch those when I was a little kid. But if I watch one of them now, I'm disgusted by the way they portray those Native Americans. I don't appreciate it. And by the way, where I grew up, there were very few cowboys and very few Indians. Most of us, well, I grew up 5 miles east of Enid, Oklahoma. You have no idea what Enid, Oklahoma is? Well, let me tell you something. When I was growing up there, it was the wheat capital of the world. Have you ever driven by a town that had these huge grain elevators? Have you ever driven north of the river and noticed off to the right of the interstate, there's these huge big concrete things that go way up and like bubbled out?
Silos.
Okay, we call them silos. Take a bunch of silos, build them out of concrete, and put them next to each other and just line them up, and they become a grain elevator. a place where they store grain. And Enid, Oklahoma had more huge grain storage elevators than any place in the world. And there were railroads coming into Enid from all directions because they would harvest the wheat and take it to a little local elevator. They would load it in railroad cars and ship it to Enid, where it would be stored until it could be sold or shipped overseas or whatever they wanted to do with it. But Enid was the wheat capital of the world because the town was centrally located to a huge region that raised wheat. So if you go down there after school's out, you drive down to my part of Oklahoma, all you see for miles and miles are wheat fields. What did this say? You don't see any cowboys, you don't see any Indians. I think I had one cousin who dressed like a cowboy and he raised cattle. And his other brother was a wheat farmer and he didn't have any use for wheat farmers because he was a cowboy. So if cowboys don't have any use for wheat farmers, have you figured out what happens in Oklahoma? Wheat farmers think cowboys are just stupid. And what about Indians? I never saw an Indian in all my years of growing up in Enid, Oklahoma. Never saw an Indian. I guess the Indians weren't interested in raising wheat. They were living in eastern Oklahoma, raising cattle, where the soil wasn't as good at raising wheat as it was in the flatlands of Oklahoma where I lived. So even though this is talking about the culture, it's not giving the whole picture. And I'm from Oklahoma, so I can tell you that. So if you go find one of these for your home state or home area or hometown, then you'll have to critique it as well. Most of the Native Americans who live in Oklahoma were forcibly relocated here. Why was that? Because the United States wanted where they lived to be homesteaded by Europeans, so they told them they had to move. And they said, we have a place for you to live, and it's called Oklahoma. Now, when the Native Americans were all moved to Oklahoma, it was just grassland. But this tells about it too. The Choctaw were the first tribe to be moved from the southeastern United States in 1830. The most famous are the Cherokee. They were forced to walk the Trail of Tears that ended in Oklahoma. Today, the historic trail is a stark reminder of the unfair treatment Native Americans received at the hands of the American government. But you know, the American government wouldn't have driven them out of there if the Europeans who had gone there to live hadn't made a big fuss about Native Americans being here, and we need to get rid of them so we can turn this into productive farmland. By 1890, over 30 Native American tribes were living in Indian territory. That's what Oklahoma was called. The land was supposed to be the exclusive domain of the tribes, but by the end of the 19th century, cattle trails from Texas were cutting through the area, and cowboys were illegally encroaching on their grassland. It's like, hey, this is a good place to fatten up our cattle before we take them on to Kansas City and sell them so they can be put in a railroad car and shipped back east to feed all the people on the East Coast. Thus began the era of cattle ranchers and cowboys that persists today in Oklahoma, the site of America's largest stockyard on the edge of Oklahoma City. But remember, north of Oklahoma City, about an hour's drive, is a little town called Enid that was the wheat capital of the world because Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas would haul wheat into there before it would be shipped someplace else in the world. And that's the little pocket, that's the little culture that I grew up in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's next phase centered around an oil boom that made Tulsa the oil capital of the world in 1920s. Now this is funny. They put the Native Americans in Oklahoma because they thought the land was worthless. What happened once they discovered there was oil underneath all that land? It made all the Native Americans rich? Nope. They took it away from the Native Americans and gave it to the oil tycoons. Yeah. The modern era has seen Oklahoma continue to thrive on the cattle industry and wheat farming. In 1995, Oklahoma City was the site of, oh, I see what's going on. This Oklahoma history was written by someone from Oklahoma City. So you understand? They're describing Oklahoma's culture from the focus of where they live. If they had lived in Enid and wrote this, they would be talking about raising wheat. If they had lived in Tulsa and wrote this, they would be talking about music. The Oklahoma Balladeer, you've never heard of him? Oklahoma has its own brand of music. You ought to hear some of those Oklahoma ballads. Home on the Range? Except it's not an Oklahoma ballad. I mean, I thought it was all my life because it sounded just like where I grew up. Come to find out, it's written by some guy in Kansas and was made popular by somebody in Texas. But Tulsa is almost like, what? Is it Memphis, Tennessee, where there's a lot of music going on? And there's Branson, Missouri. Well, Memphis and Branson are big places. Tulsa, Oklahoma is a little country music hometown. Oh, they had to talk about McVeigh bombing the federal building, which was sad. The name Oklahoma is made up from two Choctaw Native American words that translate to red people. The state has a deep connection to the country's Native American tribes, but most of it is unpleasant. The 5 civilized tribes in the Cherokee Nation were forced into Oklahoma from the east, many along the infamous Trail of Tears. And see, the 5 civilized tribes, remember I told you, I couldn't graduate from high school like in Missouri. Used to be our daughters couldn't graduate from high school without passing a Missouri Constitution test. I couldn't graduate from high school without passing a test over the 5 civilized tribes. In Oklahoma, if you don't understand how civilized those 5 tribes were, and once you understand how civilized they were, and you realize how they were mistreated by the government on the Trail of Tears, you're not very loyal to the government sometimes. You're a little suspicious of what might happen. The other side of the coin belongs to ranchers and cowboys. It's hard to go anywhere in Oklahoma without seeing something related to cows and cowboys. And wheat, see how they've left that out? The area was a major thoroughfare for cattle trails in the early 20th century. Cattle trails. You know this interchange up here that you go down, you go up 71 Highway and there's this big interchange? And it's called the Grandview Triangle? Or is it, now it's called the 3 Trails Interchange, isn't it? You know what those 3 trails are? Those are trails that went to Texas and California and Oregon. California and Oregon were settlers moving that direction. Texas was where they were bringing up cattle to sell in the stockyards here and ship them back east to feed all those folks back east. The people here are quite friendly. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So visitors can expect a fairly warm welcome wherever they travel. Oh yeah? When our daughters were in high school, the youth pastor at our church here in town took the youth group on a missions trip to Mexico. And he grew up in Nebraska, so he's wearing his Nebraska sweatshirt. And they pull into a restaurant in Oklahoma, go inside to eat, and the waitress comes by and takes everybody's order and passes him up. And he says, you didn't get mine. And she said, if you want something to eat, ask one of these people to order it for you. I don't serve people wearing Nebraska sweatshirts. Anyone know anybody from Nebraska? Mm-hmm. Have you heard them talk about the Nebraska-Oklahoma athletic rivalry? Maybe you've heard about the Nebraska-Kansas rivalry. Does anyone know what the state flower is in Nebraska? Do you know what the state flower is in Kansas?
Yeah.
Yeah, sunflower.
Sunflower.
A sunflower. Okay, are you ready for this? Nebraska passed a law that said sunflowers are noxious weeds. And Kansas retaliated by passing a law that says the Nebraska state flower is a noxious weed. That's what happens in government in America. They sit around taking shots at each other. By the way, when I was a kid, we had a relative who came from Texas. I don't know how we got a relative from Texas, but he would come up to these big family reunions, and it'd be time to eat, and all the mothers would say, "Come on in, boys, it's time to eat." He said, "Hey, partner," and his son would look up and said, "It's chow time." And I'm going, sounds like we're going out to feed the hogs or something. But see, that's the way Oklahomans are. They just make fun of the way other people talk. They make derogatory comments about it. There's nothing wrong with a Texan talking that way. So, anybody here from Texas? Do Texans make fun of Oklahomans? Do they ever? And Arkansasians? Not as much as Oklahomans?
Yeah, not as much as Oklahoma.
That's right.
Isn't that something? Now that's why Okies make fun of Texans. I mean, I still remember, I drove to Texas one time, and I had the radio on, and here's this guy. "Don't forget to go to Joe's Barbecue on the north side of town. It's the best barbecue in Texas and the rest of the world." And I'm going, you mean Texas and the rest of the United States? No, he doesn't. He means Texas, Texas, and the rest of the world. He lumps Oklahoma in with China and Australia and India. We're going, these people aren't serious. Hey, they were serious, but you know why I got over it? When I went to a restaurant, I ordered a chef salad. You ought to see a chef salad in Texas. I'm telling you, boy, they really load them up. Okay, so if I'm going to give you some Oklahoma history, wouldn't it only be fair if you had some Missouri history? But now understand, see, I had to qualify the Oklahoma history because I'm from Oklahoma. That's why I gave you that one first. So is there anybody here from Missouri?
Born in St. Louis.
So you'll have to give us a critique of this Missouri history.
I'm from the East Coast.
But I'm an Arkansas at heart.
But keep in mind, if this history was written by somebody from St. Louis, do you realize it would have a different slant to it than if it's written from somebody from Kansas City or somebody from Jefferson City or from Rolla? Missouri truly is the gateway between the east and the west of America. Now wait a minute. Okay, they've got a big arch, right? That says gateway to the west. Okay, does anyone know where people went to buy wagon trains to head west to California and Oregon? Did they buy their wagon trains in St. Louis? They bought them in St. Joe and headed west. And the cattle that came from Texas and Mexico up here to feed Americans on the East Coast, did it go from Texas and Mexico and Texas and Oklahoma to St. Louis or to Kansas City? So which is the gateway to the west, St. Louis or Kansas City? Now, I'm from Kansas City, so what do I say? We are the gateway to the west. St. Louis was a stepping off place from the east. What else does it say? Missouri is a seemingly endless array of forests, lakes, and rivers. I told you, didn't I? When I first moved to Kansas City, all these trees gave me claustrophobia. I grew up in Oklahoma. Is this in, where you grew up in Texas? Can you go outside at night and watch the sunset and just see for miles and miles?
Yeah, it depends where I'm at though.
See, in Kansas and Oklahoma where I grew up, the flatlands just go on and on and on and on, and they're beautiful. Wide open spaces. In Missouri, the hills get in the way of seeing the next thing that's going on. I mean, hills and valleys, but once I got used to all these trees and all these hills and valleys, I don't know if you know this or not. Oh, did I have you look at a map in this class that showed all those conservation areas all over the state of Missouri?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, this state is full of some of the best fishing holes you will ever find, and they're free, public access. Yes.
Missouri's flat compared to Pennsylvania.
In Arkansas.
Oh, and since you bring up Pennsylvania, I went there one time as a visiting professor to a college in the summertime. My pastor was from Pennsylvania. So when I get back, he says, "So what do you think of Pennsylvania, Tom?" Okay, I'm from Oklahoma. It just slipped out. When you've seen one gray rock, you've seen them all. Pennsylvania is just a big pile of gray rocks. Whoa, whoa, did I touch a nerve with my pastor?
You got rebuked.
Wow. Wow. But see, to me, Missouri was mountainous. Missouri was hilly. Then after I went to Colorado and saw a real mountain, I'm going, if they call something a mountain in Oklahoma, it's dishonest. We have no mountains in Oklahoma. And by the way, you have no mountains in Missouri either. When you've seen a Colorado mountain, you've seen a mountain. That is just amazing out there. Long before European colonists arrived, the Native American Mississippian culture thrived in the river valley around St. Louis and beyond. French Canadians arrived in 1750 from the north, from Canada. Oh, that's why they're called French Canadians. Founding a village at today's St. Genevieve. In 1764, the French moved from New Orleans and founded St. Louis. Many of these early towns have retained much of their historic look. From 1764 until 1803, the region west of the Mississippi was controlled by the French or Spanish until the United States acquired the territory as part of the Louisiana Purchase. Have you ever seen what the Louisiana Purchase looks like? All the way from Louisiana clear up to the Canada line, and it just gets wider as it goes up because they bought all that from the French. And at this point, Missouri was a thriving center of the fur trade. The only fur trade I ever engaged in Oklahoma was catching skunks and skinning them and selling their furs in town to a fur trader. You go, what do you do with skunk fur? They dye it and put it in all those fur coats you girls buy at the store. They're lined with skunk hide. It doesn't smell. But Missouri has other kinds of fur trade. In fact, one time I was out fishing and I saw a beaver dam. And I thought, I've never in my life trapped a beaver. Wouldn't that be cool to do that? And plus I could make a little extra money doing that. So I got on the internet for the conservation department, found out what I had to do to get a license to trap beaver, bought some beaver traps. Boy, those things will break your arm and your leg if you step in them. Bought some beaver traps, put them out down around the beaver hut, caught some beaver. My wife had a fit, wrapped them up in plastic and put them in the freezer till I could collect enough of them to go sell them to a fur trader. I had to drive 60 miles south of Kansas City to find a fur trader. He paid me, I think it was $7 for 6 furs.
Wow. That could be
He said it'd have been a little more if you'd have skinned them out. All the way home, my wife's laughing. What'd you pay for those traps? Oh, about $40 a piece. And how many trips did you make going down there to check those traps every day to make sure if you had a beaver you took it out? Oh, I don't think I want to do that either. So my beaver trapping days are over, but I'm the only Okie I know who can say he's trapped beaver. That was cool. Okay, now I have another one of these for you for tomorrow, but for Wednesday, but we're out of time. But okay, I've got Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas. Now, see, that's what I'm doing this for. So what did I forget?
Arkansas.
Texas.
Texas.
Arkansas, Texas. What else?
Puerto Rico.
Kidding.
Puerto Rico.
I mean, me and my sister kind of lived everywhere, so which place do you want us to choose? Which place would you rather be in the U.S. or not
Okay,
in the U.S.?
it's which place do you want to talk about? Which place do you want to have discussed in class today?
West Africa.
No.
What?
Pennsylvania.
North Africa?
No.
No.
West
No, well,
Africa.
she chooses one, you choose
Okay,
one.
go.
North Africa?
No, West Africa.
West Africa.
Pennsylvania.
What?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Do I have them all? Now here's the thing. See, if we spend all of our time talking about these places, we're not going to get to read all the material.
That's okay.
No,
That's
no.
See, that's what I say. I say, is it okay with you guys? I mean, I think this chapter is pretty much, the first part here is where they talk about theory a little bit, and I've helped you understand some of the words. I'm thinking that you read the material on cultural geography, and then we spend our class time, because with all of these and only having 2 days for this class, today and Wednesday, it's going to take
Oh, work days Friday.
It's Thursday.
Wait, what?
No, it's Thursday.
Thursday's workday.
So
But
we
see,
have plus Friday.
see, I only have today and Wednesday to cover this chapter. Then I have to move on to a new chapter. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4,
Work
5
days.
plus Kansas that I need to give out on Wednesday. But is this a fun way to study cultural geography? Does it help you kind of, while we've been talking through it, does it help you kind of understand your own cultural geography?
Yeah.
Our reactions to stuff?
Yes.
Did you notice how when I passed out Oklahoma and then Missouri, when I said, have I missed any places? Hands go up like that, like what? Yes, I missed Arkansas, didn't I? I almost printed off Arkansas to bring it today, but I thought, well, introducing this stuff, I won't have time to do that. So we'll make sure we get Arkansas
First
and
state.
Texas.
We want to talk about
The natural state, it says.
We are.
It used to be the land of opportunity.
Oh, I don't know about that.
It ain't that.
No, I better turn this off before I say that.